The Mediterranean at 2240 is, from altitude, a darkness interrupted by the specific lights of civilization arranged around a sea that has been arranging civilization around it for longer than most civilizations have existed. The coastal lights of Sicily to the north. The faint glow of the Tunisian coast to the southwest. Below, the water, black and unreflective at this hour, the kind of surface that absorbs light rather than returning it, giving back nothing to anyone looking down from 24,000 feet. The P-8A Poseidon had been at 24,000 feet for 7 hours and 53 minutes. It was now on its return track to Naval Air Station Sigonella, carrying a complete mission product, 8 hours of surveillance data, acoustic buoy returns from 3 separate barrier deployments, a surface contact log updated through the final hour of the operating area, and the specific fatigue of a crew that has been performing precision cognitive work for the better part of a shift, and which has now entered the phase of a long mission where professionalism and physical tiredness coexist in the specific balance that experienced aircrew manage and the medical community monitors. The aircraft was clean. The mission was complete. The remaining fuel was exactly what you would expect to see in a P-8A that had been airborne for 7 hours and 53 minutes, and which had approximately 94 minutes of flight remaining to its destination. 94 minutes. Not a crisis. Not comfortable either, if something happened between here and Sigonella that required departure from the planned routing. The defensive systems operator at her station was in the particular mental state of someone transitioning from operational focus to administrative completion, running the final collection log update, ensuring that the day's product would transfer cleanly when the aircraft landed, mentally cataloging the items in the debrief sequence that would require the most time. She was not expecting the radar warning receiver to produce its alert tone at 22:43. She had been on the return leg for 31 minutes. The return leg from long surveillance missions has a specific psychological character. The work is done, the crew is going home, and the threat environment transitions from the evaluated risk of the operating area to the lower probability risk of transit. She was professional enough not to have fully settled into this psychological transition. She was human enough that the alert tone at 22:43 registered with a very slightly longer processing latency than it would have in hour 2 of the mission rather than hour 8. 3 seconds. That is what the latency was from the subsequent timeline reconstruction. 3 seconds from alert tone to classification query. The classification returned in 4 additional seconds. Irbis-E pulse Doppler fire control radar, the specific system integrated into the Su-35 Flanker S. Operating on the frequency band and with the scan characteristics that the AN/ALQ-240's library associated with a single-seat air superiority fighter in search mode. The bearing was 178. The range estimate from signal strength, approximately 42 miles. Closing. The Su-35 Flanker S is Russia's current generation air superiority fighter, the aircraft that replaced the Su-27 in frontline service, and which is, in the specific vocabulary of honest threat assessment, a serious aircraft operated by a serious air force, in a way that earns serious respect. The Irbis-E passive electronically scanned radar is capable of tracking airborne targets at ranges exceeding 350 kilometers, maintaining multiple tracks simultaneously, and providing the fire control solution for the R-77-1 and R-37M long-range air-to-air missiles that the Su-35 carries in standard configuration. The R-37M has a stated maximum range of 300 kilometers in the high-altitude engagement geometry, a range at which a target aircraft could, in principle, be engaged before its crew had any indication that a Su-35 was in the vicinity. This channel will not mock the Su-35. The Su-35 does not invite mockery. It invites the specific kind of professional attention that capable adversary systems receive from people who understand what they are looking at. What the Su-35 approaching from the south at 22:43 did not have, what its crew did not know was absent, was any meaningful element of surprise. The Su-35 had departed Khmeimim Air Base in western Syria at 22:07, 36 minutes before the P-8A's radar warning receiver detected its Irbis-E. The AN/ALQ-240 had detected the Irbis-E at 22:43 because that was the range at which the signal strength crossed the detection threshold at the P-8A's current altitude and atmospheric conditions. The Fifth Fleet's airborne surveillance architecture, specifically a NATO E-3 Sentry AWACS aircraft operating in the central Mediterranean on its own patrol orbit, had detected the Su-35's departure from Khmeimim on its own radar at 22:08, 1 minute after takeoff, and had been tracking it continuously since. The AWACS had the Su-35's course, speed, altitude, and projected intercept geometry calculated and transmitted to the P-8A's mission commander at 22:31, 12 minutes before the P-8A's own radar warning receiver detected anything. The P-8A crew knew a Su-35 was coming before the Su-35 was close enough for its own radar to show up on their warning gear. They had been preparing for this encounter for 12 minutes. By 22:43, the question was not whether an intercept was happening, but what kind of intercept it was going to be, and what the P-8A could reasonably do about it. The answer to the second part of that question is honest and direct. Not much. A P-8A Poseidon, a Boeing 737 Maritime Patrol variant, does not have an evasion option against a Su-35 in afterburner. The speed differential is approximately 350 knots at the Su-35's standard intercept profile, which is roughly equivalent to a cheetah pursuing a medium-sized delivery vehicle. The P-8A has no air-to-air weapons. It has the AN/AL Q-24 Zero Electronic Support Measures Suite, a radar warning receiver, a set of communication links, and the legal and operational position of a surveillance aircraft conducting a lawful mission in international airspace, which is a meaningful form of protection, without being the kind that an aviator discusses in terms of aerodynamic performance margins. What the P-8A had, in operational terms, was the following: 94 minutes of fuel from Sigonella, an AWACS in contact, a clear declaration of its identity and mission on guard frequency, and the appropriate ATC frequencies, and a crew that had been awake for 9 hours, and which was performing exactly the way crews who have been awake for 9 hours and have received 12 minutes of notice that a Su-35 is inbound are supposed to perform, with focus, with documentation discipline, and with the specific acknowledgement that the situation they were managing was genuinely uncomfortable and not going to become comfortable by pretending otherwise. The vulnerability in this scenario is not the same as the vulnerability in a surface or missile threat scenario. There is no window that closes when a system goes back online, or a course change opens a range margin. The vulnerability is this: at 22:43, USS Cole was the nearest dedicated fighter-capable platform, approximately 140 miles to the southeast, which is useful context, but not useful air support, because carrier-based fighters require launch cycle time. And the Su-35 was going to be at the P-8A before any scrambled aircraft from any available base could interpose. The nearest NATO air base capable of a rapid reaction was Decimomanu in Sardinia, 112 miles to the north, with no dedicated alert aircraft on the relevant bearing. There was an Italian Air Force QRA, Quick Reaction Alert, on Strip Alert at Grosseto, about 200 miles to the northeast. At Mach 1.6 from Grosseto, a scrambled Eurofighter Typhoon would arrive at the P-8A's position in approximately 8 minutes from wheels up. Scramble authorization, pre-flight, and taxi time would add 4 to 6 minutes. The Su-35 was 42 miles away at a closing speed that would put it at visual range in approximately 5 minutes. The mission commander keyed the tactical frequency and reported the contact status to the AWACS, which already had it on scope and had already begun the notification chain. The AWACS controller confirmed the Su-35's track and provided the P-8A with a closing rate update: 37 miles, speed 922 knots ground speed, altitude descending through 18,000 feet. The Su-35 was descending to the P-8A's altitude. This is the standard intercept approach geometry. The intercepting aircraft descends from above to arrive at the target's altitude on a bearing that allows visual identification at close range. It is also the approach geometry used in genuine attacks. which is why the distinction between a planned identification intercept and a preliminary attack approach is a matter of subsequent behavior, rather than initial approach geometry. The P-8A's crew was watching that subsequent behavior very carefully. At 22:47, the Irbis-E transitioned from search mode to track mode. The AN/ALQ-240 detected the transition in 0.6 seconds. The defensive systems operator reported it to the cockpit immediately. Track mode. Not yet fire control lock. Track mode is the mode in which the Irbis-E maintains a dedicated solution on a specific target. Not the broad sweep of search mode. Not the committed engagement state of fire control. But the intermediate state in which the radar has designated a target and is refining its kinematic solution. A fire control radar in track mode is an aircraft whose pilot has, at minimum, selected the P-8A as his primary track object and may be in the process of developing an engagement solution. Track mode does not mean launch is imminent. Track mode means the situation has developed to the point where it will resolve, one way or another, in the next several minutes. The mission commander transmitted on guard frequency at 22:47:31, identifying the aircraft, its position, altitude, and heading, and noting that a Russian military aircraft was conducting an approach on bearing 178. The transmission was calm. It was precise. It was delivered in the specific voice of a senior officer who is making a record and communicating status simultaneously, and who understands that the transmission is being monitored by the AWACS, by the Fleet Operations Center, and by whatever Russian assets were in range of the guard frequency. The Su-35's crew heard it. They did not respond. What happened next, what the Su-35 did when it reached visual range at 22:49, is the kind of story that has become a recognizable pattern in Russian intercept operations over the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and the Norwegian Sea. The Su-35 executed a close visual identification pass at approximately 150 meters of lateral separation. No navigation lights. The afterburner glow, the only immediately visible feature in the darkness at that range. The P-8A's external cameras, running continuously since the AWACS first reported the contact, captured the Su-35 from acquisition through the pass and departure. The footage showed the Su-35's standard external configuration. R-77-1 missiles on the outboard wing pylons, the distinctive flanker tail configuration, the Irbis-E's flat antenna array, visible through the nose cone in the thermal camera's return. Every detail was documented. Every detail went into the post-incident report and the intelligence annex. 150 meters. At that separation at night, with no navigation lights, the P-8A's crew experienced the specific 70-second period of a close-range night intercept by an aircraft carrying long-range air-to-air missiles that has just completed its track mode targeting solution and is sitting 150 meters off your wing. This is the moment that the P-8A's professional composure earns its description. The crew's audio, captured by the cockpit recording system, contains 3 relevant exchanges during that 70 seconds. None of them suggest anything other than people doing their jobs under conditions they would not have chosen. All 3 exchanges were clinical, precise, and produced information that went directly into the incident documentation. The third exchange was between the pilot and the defensive systems operator, and it contained one word, a single-syllable word that the incident report's transcription section rendered as expletive, that was delivered in the tone of someone updating a working assessment rather than expressing panic, immediately followed by the defensive systems operator's acknowledgement and a range update. This is what composure looks like when it is genuine rather than performed. Now the intelligence picture, because 70 seconds of Su-35 operation at 150 meters from a US surveillance aircraft's AN/ALQ-240 collection suite is a dataset whose quality is determined by proximity, and 150 meters is very close. The Irbis-E's track mode emission, recorded at ranges from 42 miles to 150 meters, provided the complete frequency agility and power output characterization across a dynamic range that no previous collection event in the Mediterranean theater had achieved. The signal-to-noise ratio at 150 meters was, in the words of the AN/ALQ 240's technical documentation, essentially perfect. The kind of signal quality where the limiting factor on characterization. Completeness is the collection system's bandwidth, rather than the signal level. What the collection captured: the complete track mode. Frequency agility sequence. 37 individual mode transitions from initial search through track through post-pass reversion to search. The specific Irbis-E variant's transmitter power output. Differential between long-range and close-range operating modes. And the finding the intelligence staff would spend the most time on. A brief activation of a mode that the library had categorized as probable ECM monitoring function, based on previous incomplete collection events. At 150 meters, the activation was complete enough to characterize definitively. It was not an ECM monitoring function. It was an active jamming capability that the Irbis-E had not previously been confirmed to carry in an operational configuration. The confirmation required moving probable to confirmed in the threat library. Moving probable to confirmed for an active jamming capability in an operational Su-35 has implications for how every NATO aircraft flying in Russia's potential reach models the threat envelope. The implications were distributed. The distribution list was long. The external camera footage produced the weapons load documentation. R-77-1 configuration confirmed. No R-37M on this sortie. And the airframe configuration comparison that revealed one modification to the Su-35's Khibiny-M electronic warfare pod, mounting hardware that differed from the previous configuration entry in the library. Small modification. Documented. The implications were a matter for the analysts to evaluate over the following week, which they did. The Su-35 completed its second pass at 2251, wider at approximately 400 meters. The Irbis-E having reverted to search mode after the first pass, the aircraft maintaining a parallel track for approximately 3 minutes before banking south and beginning its return to Khmeimim. The P-8A tracked it to 70 miles. The Irbis-E emission decreased below detection threshold at 2258. The contact was lost at 2258.43. The crew noted the departure. The defensive systems operator completed her collection log entry at 2259. The entry was thorough. It was also at the end of a 9-hour mission that had just concluded with a Su-35 at 150 meters in the dark. The product of a professional who had been awake for a long time doing difficult work and was not entirely finished doing it. The AWACS confirmed the Su-35's return vector at 2301 and updated the P-8A with the all-clear on the southern bearing. The mission commander acknowledged. He noted the fuel state. 81 minutes remaining to Sigonella. Still fine. Still not comfortable in the abstract sense, though the character of the discomfort had changed from what it had been at 2247 to something more administrative in nature. He updated the return routing with the AWACS controller, confirmed the current active weather, and settled the aircraft back onto its base track. The external cameras were secured. The collection log was closed. The debrief items had been reorganized by the events of the previous 20 minutes, and were now somewhat longer than they had been when the return leg began. The money picture for this operation has two components that illuminate different aspects of the exchange. A Su-35 operational sortie from Khmeimim, fuel for a 90-minute round trip including the afterburner usage during the Intercept approach, missile certification overhead, pilot operational pay, base support, runs to approximately $75,000 to $110,000 in equivalent Western accounting. The mission objective: demonstrate Russian air power presence in the Mediterranean operating area, document the P-8A's flight profile and electronic signature, generate an intercept record that Russian Air Force doctrine can use for assessment, and produce the specific effect of making a U.S. surveillance aircraft's crew aware that Russian fighters are present and willing to execute close intercepts without navigation lights. All of these objectives were achieved. The P-8A mission's additional cost for the Intercept event, essentially zero in direct terms. The aircraft was already flying, the crew already deployed, the fuel state already calculated. The intelligence processing for the Irbis-E characterization package and the airframe configuration documentation added approximately $130,000 in analyst time over 72 hours. This is the entire additional cost. Total additional U.S. expenditure attributable to the Su-35 sortie, $130,000. The intelligence return confirmed Irbis-E active jamming capability, previously probable, now confirmed, with full frequency and power characterization. R-77-1, loadout confirmation. Khibiny-M, mounting modification documentation. And 26 minutes of track mode emission data at ranges from 42 miles to 150 meters. The Pacific Air Force's Electronic Warfare Intelligence Staff assessed the collection value at approximately $5.8 million in equivalent collection cost. The Su-35's crew had spent 90 minutes demonstrating that they were willing to conduct close intercepts without navigation lights. The P-8A's AN/AL Q-240 had spent the same 90 minutes demonstrating that it did not require the Su-35 to have navigation lights to collect everything the encounter offered. The P-8A landed at Sigonella at 0:17. The crew debriefed for 2 hours and 11 minutes. The debrief was longer than standard because it had more than the standard amount of material to cover. The Defensive Systems Operator's Collection Summary was transmitted to the Electronic Warfare Intelligence Center before the debrief concluded. She had transmitted it from her mission system workstation in the debrief room while the pilot was describing the second pass for the incident report record, and she had transmitted it with the specific efficiency of someone who understands that good collection data should reach the people who can use it before anyone decides to sleep on it. The Irbis-E active jamming confirmation section was flagged priority. The Intelligence Center's duty officer received it at 1:44, read the flagged section, and called his section chief. The section chief arrived at 2 o'clock. They spent an hour reviewing the characterization data. By 3:15, the library update was drafted and the distribution was being prepared. By Thursday morning, every NATO aircraft operating in the Mediterranean theater had the updated Irbis-E threat profile. Russian state television carried a brief segment that afternoon in its military affairs block. The segment described a routine patrol by Russian Aerospace Forces aircraft over the Mediterranean, noting that Russian military aviation maintained continuous presence in the theater and was fully capable of responding to the ongoing provocative intelligence activities of NATO member nations. A spokesperson described the Russian Intercept as conducted in full compliance with international airspace regulations, and noted that Russian pilots were trained to the highest professional standards. The broadcast included archival footage of a Su-35 in flight during daylight, the distinctive flanker planform, the clean lines, the thrust vectoring nozzles that give the aircraft its super maneuverability. It was, as always, genuinely impressive footage, because the Su-35 is genuinely an impressive aircraft. The broadcast did not specify that the intercept had been conducted without navigation lights. It did not mention the Irbis-E's track mode activation at 22:47. It did not address the 150 meters of the first pass. It described a professional, routine patrol. The incident report, now in the distribution at NATO headquarters, Pacific Command, and the relevant intelligence centers, used different words for some of the same events. Both documents were real. Both described the same Tuesday night. The gap between them was, again, the operational space where the real accounting of the evening resided. The accounting was in the library update. The library update went to the fleet. The fleet goes back out tomorrow. Bye for now.